This month, we've travelled back to Andrew Salter's beautiful barn in Kent, where he has created an exquisite garden in the middle of a meadow. We were here last November when his conifers were the star of the show. Now, of course, everything has changed. Let's find out what has happened in the intervening months. Well, we're back again since last November, and gosh, the place has grown. It's exploded.
So much has changed.
Yes.
And actually, it's gone through several cycles.
Absolutely.
Even since then.
Yes.
It was still fully grown when you came,
Yes,
and then of course
yes.
that time concludes.
Yes.
And for most of winter, actually, of course, there are woody ingredients that are getting
Yes,
to be
that
more
have
and
kept
more
going,
important.
yes.
But for most of winter, I cut back the whole garden.
Yes, I remember. Yeah.
So really, it becomes a square
Yes.
of dark soil,
Yeah.
more of which I add to really increase that effect
Yeah.
and give this kind of blank canvas. And then everything sleeps, as it were, or most of it does, and then
I can
slowly
imagine.
starts the awakening process. And we're several phases through
We
that
are,
now.
yes. And of course, you've had almost tropical weather, and you've had tropical growth. I mean, you can barely see the house.
Well, that was always the intention, was for the garden to feel overwhelming. As soon as I saw this location, which is 11 years ago now, there wasn't a garden here. The area of land that I bought was smaller than this, and it had been a sheep field, and so it had been grazed, but it was quite weedy, no plants here at all. And I just had I had a vision, I suppose, of this very simple structure,
Yeah.
very humble dwelling place,
Yes.
it's barely more than a shed, surrounded by a densely planted garden, then a much more simpler, at least, from a certain resolution, simpler wildflower meadow, and then that's surrounded by the downs and the river and so on and so on.
And so you start the year with bulbs, presumably.
I start with bulbs. I bring in compost, so it's a black, empty canvas. Bulbs will start, snowdrops will come, crocuses will come. Then I get cow parsley.
Yeah.
Well, all the tulips come with forget-me-nots.
Yeah.
Semi-wild
Yeah,
ingredient, sows itself around. As they go over, of course, you can see cow parsley growing
Yes, you can. It's a
all through
biennial,
winter.
isn't it?
Or a short-lived perennial.
Yes.
Yeah. And actually, there was a lot here in the meadow when I moved in, and I loved it so much that I was transplanting it into the garden.
Yes.
Most gardeners would call me crazy, and they might be right. But it is a risk, and cow parsley will swamp its neighbours, and it's something you always have to keep an eye on. And then also, it goes from being something that looks like it's descended from heaven,
Yes, to some.
to really overnight becoming a number of sordid sticks and seed heads. It all goes brown.
It doesn't have the kind of structure really of these, does it?
No, and also it's just that those browns and blacks at that time of year are so conspicuous.
Yes.
And so you can go from loving it one day to really actually detesting it and desperately being compelled to remove it, pulling it out and digging it out. And then that makes lots of space. And so something with a garden like this, one of the tasks, one of the necessities is kind of keeping the engine running. And I think if this were a more polite, perhaps professionally designed garden, where balance and proportion is set up from the very beginning, and those designs can often play it somewhat safe in order to retain such a balance through the year.
Yeah.
And with a garden like this, that's always shifting, shifting. That harmony and proportion is there, but you find it from new angles and from new perspectives every day.
Yes.
And some might see that as a challenge or, as too much of a responsibility to deal with, but to me, that's where all the fun is.
Yes, fantastic.
This shifting of levels.
Yeah.
And it is somewhat unpredictable.
Do you let in? Tell me.
Cow parsley is a big one. And then moving on from there, the next obvious one is poppies.
Poppies that come in from the meadow.
They come in from the meadow. I'll sow some. I'll sow opium poppies. I'll sow ladybird poppies. But I've been doing that for a number of years now. And so they're all hybridizing with each other and with the ingredients that come in from all the fields nearby. Again, A poppy, we think of it as a gentle, pastoral, sort of bucolic, delight and a fancy.
Yeah.
And they're grossly competitive, of course. And when you see the seedlings appear, it's a thrill. Again, it's like you've been blessed by some sort of magic. But that magic causes havoc. And as we might see, so I'll bring poppies in, and as soon as I see them as seedlings, I can't thin them. I can't remove them. And you'll see, I guess you know the same, you know how it is. You see them next to a beloved perennial, and you can't
know that one's
stop
going to...
them encroaching.
No.
So you wait and wait and wait and just hope and pray that by the time you have to remove them, that they haven't done too much damage.
And when things like, I don't know, stinging nettles come in, do you physically weed them? Or...
Oh, I wish I had time. No,
exactly.
I don't.
So how do you stop that completely taking over your garden?
Just sheer effort.
Yeah.
And it comes
when
from
you're
love.
the cut down?
All the time. Yeah. One of the joys and challenges of having a home in the middle of a garden is that you see what it needs all the time.
Yeah. This is a pretty grass.
I don't know if it's, I need to look it up. I don't know whether it's an Aragrostis.
Pretty.
But it was all here, and there's more of it over there. And as the sun sets down here, suddenly the red really starts to glow.
Yeah.
And this with self-sown knapweed, or even the poppies.
Yes. No, it is lovely. Do you go the what's that stuff called that people plant in grass?
Hay rattle.
Yes.
Or yellow
do you go
rattle.
For that?
I had to, yeah.
But it doesn't look as if...
Well, at the front it does. So the front meadow I started working on many years before this. And it was very, very slow. The first year there were you could count the plants.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the second year maybe that had doubled. And then if that doubles every year, then it's starting to make a difference.
Yeah. No, I've got lots. But it does, I miss the grass. It's silly, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting as you say, because of course we're taught and told, and understandably, that we want to encourage as much species diversity as possible, thereby weakening the coarse grasses. And that is, I suppose, my intention here. And there is much more diversity at the front. And this is a bit of a monoculture, but it's a lovely monoculture.
No, I think that has a lot
and the movement, as soon as it all flowers in June, the movement really, there's something deeply calming about it. It changes the whole scene.
Yeah.
And then again, when I mow all this, which I'll do September, October, I'll hire in a power scythe, 2 days, do the whole meadow, do it twice, rake everything, remove everything, mow, which I used to do with a fly mow, rake all of that, remove all of that to take away the nutrition, and then mow again. So it's probably 8-9 days it takes to do that.
I would have thought that.
But then you do that and it completely changes the feel of the place again. And suddenly it's like putting on a new pair of spectacles.
And here are more poppies.
Yes, indeed. And actually this section is the one where the poppy seedbed seems to have found itself. Yeah. It's very much now gone over. And so this is an example of the sort of gardening that I do here, where I am inviting in elements from outside, wild elements, but they need managing. And there will be times when certain areas...
You're quite keen to show these the door. Whereas the opium poppies, they look quite good.
They look quite good.
Yeah, quite
but all in all, you can see this area really needing attention. Again, it's getting far too brown.
So you'll be in there this evening?
I'll be in there this very weekend, I think, pulling it. And then the great fun starts of it's now July, but there's enough time to put in one new layer of planting.
One layer of...
So I've got lots of zinnias and rudbeckias and a few annual grasses, so on and so on, and a few perennials left over as well that I'll work in. And then there is a base framework of young trees. Actually, there are a few conifers in there that you're yet to really see.
So if I come to one of your open days in August, I will see all these...
Well, this will be a completely different scene, and it will zing and it will be fresh.
Well, I shall definitely be there.
And I think one of the beauties of working this way, we're all told low maintenance is the way, and of course I understand that. But how much fun is that? I'm a believer in perhaps moderate to even high maintenance, but on a certain scale.
Yes.
where it's achievable and it doesn't get to be too much of a stress. And I think when you're inviting in the wild like this, you do need to be ready to replace it to keep the show going. But with a bit of organisation, it doesn't take that much time. Sow some seed, prick them out, pot them up, 6 weeks later, plant them. And with this garden, fortunately enough, those periods happen, it's like a domino effect, they all happen at different times. And so hopefully it's not that obvious that the big change has happened.
No.
Because there's a lot else around to keep the interest up. So a lot of the cow pasture, in fact, was at the front there. I ripped all of that out. Holes everywhere. It's a bit depressing to see. But there's the anti-rhinums, the snapdragons, the Potomac varieties that are tall.
Good tall ones,
tall.
It's not horrid looking.
I sowed lots of those, and so those are all in there now. Those are starting to fill those gaps. And then by August, again, it'll be a completely new scene. But they'll be placed around all of the permanent ingredients so that it's never a completely empty space. For me, there's nothing that makes me happier. I've never known a feeling like it, you know, that flow state that you hear about where you're acting spontaneously and you're engaged in an endeavor, but also you're in service to what you're surrounded by, and you're trying to get to know the plants better and to see what they're calling out for. One of the things that you do learn as a gardener, I'm sure you'll agree, is that you start with a plan and you start with intentions, and there are lots of life lessons to gain from working in the garden. One of which is you start out taking because you have your idea and your plan that you want to achieve, and then you realise, well, you're dealing with living things, and actually to make living things thrive, you have to give more so than take.
And you have to divert, and you have to, I mean, that's the joy of it, really, isn't it? So, after you've cleared away these poppies, what are your next big jobs, and are you opening to the public?
I am opening. I think there will be 2 open days this year. One I can hereby announce.
Right.
For Saturday, August the 15th. We'll open on that day, and then I haven't quite settled on a date for the other one. I think August should be a highlight because by then, here in this section as well as in others, I'll have added in all of the annuals. The tender perennials are now all in. I still have crates of annuals that I'm sowing. They really need to go in now for a late summer display. So that's what I'll be doing here, probably at the weekend, completely replacing this with a variety of annuals. Trying to find spaces for them. I always think that I have too many, but there's always somewhere. And then it's a case of just keeping on top of it, sowing seeds for next year. I've already done cosmos. September, I'll sow poppies for next year. I'll sow viper's bugloss, so on and so on. Hesperus or layer, and start to think about next year. And then moving on to the meadow. And the meadow will need its cut.
Thing for you,
So there's always work to do.
Always work to do.
There's never really a day off unless you're very strict with your time. And we'll have gone full circle, and the garden will be back at the sort of state that you saw it when you first visited.
And we're very lucky to have gone through a whole gardening year with you, Andrew.
Well,
thank you so much
for
letting us come again.
It's
been
a great
really
privilege.
great. I feel we could visit this garden every month and not get bored. If you're lucky enough to live nearby, Andrew will be opening his garden to the public in August and October. Follow him on Instagram to find out more. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please follow How My Garden Grows wherever you get your podcasts. That way you'll never miss an episode.